Hey, fancy listeners. Franchesca Hampton here, and I am honored that you took time to tune in once again. And I'm committed to sharing content that will make you glad you did. So, welcome to the Fancy Thoughts Podcast, a weekly podcast designed to give you perspective, insight, and encouragement to release the greatness inside of you. I want you to live fancy life, where you are fostering achievement, never compromising you, because someone is waiting for you. Hey, fancy listeners, it's time again for another episode of Fancy Thoughts. But before we get into this week, we have to recap what we talked about last week. Last week, we talked about the needful answer is no. And if I'm honest, this was by far one of my most favorite episodes, because it was a discussion on things that I believe all of us needed a reminder on, including myself. And that is, we have to be willing to say no to the unnecessary. We gave you 4 different questions to ask yourself before you volunteer to do something or before you quickly say yes to doing something. We also talked about the reasons that you should give when you say no, including no reason at all. And finally, we talked about understanding what no does not mean. So if you did not hear last week's episode, I'm going to encourage you to stop right now, go back to episode 14, listen to that, and then come back for this week's episode, because the needful answer is still no. Now let's get into this week's fancy thought. This week's fancy thought is so integral to fancy as a whole. In case you don't remember, fancy is not just my name, it's not just the name of this podcast, but fancy is the core principle of Live Fancy Life and Fancy Thoughts as a whole. Fancy stands for fostering achievement, never compromising you. I'm going to say it again. Fostering achievement, never compromising you. And so today, our fancy thought is never compromise. Now, compromise in some ways is good, right? Let's just get that out the door. We know that when we're in relationships with other people, when we're doing things with other people, there are times we have to compromise. There are times when we have to give a little to get a little. There are times when we have to choose to back down on what we want or back down on the way we want it to do things in order for something else to happen. Right? And sometimes compromise is uncomfortable. Let me say most times compromise is uncomfortable because it's a choice to say, I choose to not press forward with my own way, my own thought, my own perspective, and I choose to find a middle ground with you, with another person in another situation. And the idea is that we do this because we are not the kings and queens of the world, which means the world does not revolve around us. So we have to sometimes compromise. We have to be willing to, again, give a little to get a little. So I said all that to say that's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about the general necessary compromise that happens when you're dealing with another person that you're in a relationship with or that you're dealing with, in certain situations, right? We're not talking about that. Today, again, understanding that we're always talking about releasing greatness. We're always talking about how do you put forth the greatness that's on the inside of you, releasing it so that other people can take part of it, can be involved in it, can be influenced by you and what you have to offer or what you have intrinsically inside of you to give. So when we're talking about never compromise, we're talking about in regards to who you are, in regards to what you stand for, and in regards to your tenacity in accomplishing your goals and releasing your greatness. When we think about who we are, sometimes it's easy to compromise because it's easier. And I know that's just a play on the same words, but it can become comfortable to compromise because it's easier. Let's say it that way. It can be easy to say, okay, I'm going to back down on this because my thoughts, my opinions are unpopular. I'm going to, shift my ideas because, I'm the minority in this particular situation. Everyone else believes a different way. And in order to get everyone to come to my side or to see my perspective, then I need to compromise a little bit. And I want to tell you today, when it comes to you releasing your greatness, when it comes to you fostering achievement, when it comes to you doing what you were created, designed, and purposed to do, my friend, my brother, my sister, you must never compromise. Now, that sounds like a very strong statement, so let's look at the definition of compromise. Now, there's two dictionaries that I want to talk to you from about this word. The first one is, of course, my favorite, the Collins Dictionary. The Collins Dictionary says that a compromise is a situation in which people accept something slightly different from what they really want because of circumstances or because they are considering the wishes of other people. I didn't say that. The dictionary said that. I want to say it to you again. It is a situation in which people accept something slightly different from what they want because of circumstances or because they are considering the wishes of other people. Now, again, when you're talking about, you're in a relationship with someone and, they want to go out for dinner. You wanted to stay home and cook dinner. You compromise and you say, okay, well, we've been staying home for dinner for the past couple of days. So I'm going to compromise and go out with you. But I want to choose, a better restaurant versus just fast food, right? That's compromise. I'm choosing something slightly different from what I really want, right? Because I'm considering the wishes of someone else, right? That's the compromise we were talking about at the beginning. But if you take that same definition and you apply it to what you are doing to release your greatness, what you're doing to release your purpose, what you're doing to step out into new ventures, new businesses, new product releases, new book releases, whatever it may be, when you then accept something slightly different from what you really want because you're considering the wishes of other people, you are doing yourself a disservice. When you decide that you're going to do your business a little bit less because you're considering the wishes of other people who may not even be your target audience or target consumer, but because someone came to you and said they don't think that you should do it this way, you begin to change things and do things slightly different. That's compromise. One of the first examples that comes to my mind with this is as women. Many times, especially strong, bold, outspoken women. Many times when we go into certain situations and we're bringing our full self in to that situation, we have a tendency to back up a little bit because we don't want to come off as aggressive. We don't want to come off as angry. We don't want to come off as hostile. And so we change the way we say things. We compromise part of our personality because we want others to be able to accept us. And we feel that we need to do so in order to be accepted. That is not the case. You were created intentionally. When God put you together, He gave you personality. He gave you character. And there was no mistake in that design. So if you are a person that is bold and strong and outspoken, there's something wrong with you, whether you're a woman or a man. And so when you go into a particular situation, especially one where you are being asked to provide your expertise, your skill, your knowledge, you should never think to compromise in order to be received. But we do it every day. You say, well, I don't do that. Perhaps there's another situation that may not be the exact one that I'm bringing to you today where you compromise, but I'm encouraging you to look at the different areas that you show up and make sure that you are truly showing up, that you are not accepting or presenting something slightly different from what you want or who you are because you are considering the wishes or the thoughts and opinions of others. The other definition of compromise that I want to talk about is from the Lexico Dictionary. And it says this: to weaken or harm by accepting standards that are lower than is desirable. Whoa, wait a second. What? To weaken or harm by accepting standards that are lower than is desirable. That's what you are doing to yourself. That is what you are doing to your integrity and character when you compromise. You are weakening and harming yourself by accepting standards that are lower than desirable. Once again, let's use as an example. So let's say that you're writing a book and you've written it a certain way that embodies your personality, that it showcases everything that you believe and the way that you would present it the same as if you were speaking to someone. And so you take it to someone and they say, I like the content, but I think you need to soften it. It's coming across too harsh. It's coming across, too pointed. And we want to make it, easy to be read and easy to be received. And so you need to soften the tone of it. Now, if the softening of that tone begins to change your words, begins to change your perspective, begins to no longer sound like you, That's compromise. You're beginning to weaken and harm your integrity, your representation by accepting a standard or a directive that is lower or different than is desired. And you don't have to. It is so important, I believe, as we are going forward and releasing greatness, to understand that we are often asked to compromise, and we have to, just like we said last week. The needful answer is no. Never compromise. Never compromise who you are. Never compromise what you believe for the sake of someone else, for the sake of someone else's opinion, for the sake of someone else's desires, because they want you to be a certain way. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was a bit younger, not young, but younger. And, I was in the dating world, and I remember being told by certain people, like, you can't come off like that. You need to bring it down. You need to ease people into your personality because you come off too bold. You come off too strong, and that's just going to run people away. And I had also heard that just even in friendships, like, you come off really strong, and I really feel like you should just soften up a little bit until people get to know you. And then you can showcase, your boldness. You can showcase, your outspokenness. Then you can showcase all of that. And I have to tell you, for years, I accepted that as truth. For years, I accepted the idea that I needed to show a lighter version of myself to people when I first met them, or when I first meet them, or when I'm first encountering new people. I felt like that's what I really needed to do. I had to shrink back a little bit so that they could accept me, so that I could be more palatable to others. But let me tell you something. I thank God that I learned that I am great just the way that I am. There's a saying that I say each morning: I am amazing because God made me that way. Why do I say that? Because I am amazing, but it's because God made me that way. I am the way that I am because God designed me this way. And there are certain scenarios and opportunities and environments that I will be put in that require me to be outspoken, to be bold, and to be everything that I already am, to embody the fullness of who I am, to be authentically me. And so I began to recognize that someone else's inability to accept the fullness of who I am is a them problem, not a me problem. You being intimidated because I said whatever it is that I said, speaking in truth. I'm not talking about being rude. I'm not talking about being insensitive to others' mindsets or viewpoints. I'm talking about just being who you were created to be. And in this case, I'm speaking specifically about me being who I was created to be. I don't need to shrink back in order to do that. And as a matter of fact, every time that I do shrink back, I'm doing you a disservice. 2 reasons. 1, because I'm not being authentic. And 2, when I show up, now you're going to just be intimidated all over again. And you're going to be mad at me because you're like, this isn't how you were in the beginning. You've changed. Right? And so I use that as an example to just say there are so many times when we weaken and we harm ourselves and we harm our representation because we accept standards or points of view from others that are lower than is desirable. And what is desirable? Desirable is you being your authentic self. Desirable is you coming in all of you, leaving nothing on the table. Now, there are certain situations where you may have to adapt to the environment. Let's be real. Let's be honest, right? I am a very outspoken, dramatic person, but when I go into certain situations, I have to express that differently. I don't have to not express it. I have to express it differently because there are certain situations that you have to adapt to. That's, again, adulting 101. You know that you have to adapt to the situation that you're in so that you can proceed or you can influence where you're at. So I'm not talking about, just being whatever, whenever, and not giving any thought or mind to the environment that you're in. But when it comes to me being me, I may change my expression, but I'm not changing who I am. We can't weaken or harm ourselves by accepting standards or points of view or perspectives about us that are lower than is desirable. The other definition that the Lexico Dictionary gives is to compromise is to cause to become vulnerable or function less effectively. When you compromise, you are not able to function as effectively as you were designed and intended to function. I'll give that same example and I'll speak only about myself. And I hope that in this example, you're able to find something that relates to you and that you can grab hold of. But again, when I walk into situations where I am pulling back on my personality or pulling back in my authenticity, I am not able to function effectively. I'll give you another example. I had a particular situation at a previous job where people weren't able to receive what I was saying as fully as I wanted them to. Now, there are some times, if I'm honest, that I can be harsh and I can be very brash, if you will, right? And that's not me being my authentic self. That's just me being frustrated in a moment and letting words come out of my mouth without me thinking, right? So there were times when I had to really be more mindful, take a breath before I said things, be mindful of who I'm talking to, because different people receive differently, right? Some people do receive very well on the straightforward, on point, no nonsense. And some people need a little bit more color in the words that they hear. So you have to be aware of that. That's being a leader. A leader knows that the people that they are leading or the people that they are interacting with have different needs, and they adjust so that they can bring out the best in the people that they're leading. Nonetheless. So in this particular scenario, it wasn't a case of me being more brash or me being harsh. It was more me being truthful and to the point. And so I remember this particular person having an issue with me being so frank. And they were like, well, you just come off so angry. What did I say that made you think I was angry? Well, you just come out and you're just so straight to the point. So me being straight to the point means that I'm angry. I don't know where the definition of angry came for you, but that's not angry in my book. And more importantly, I'm not angry. So I'm glad that you brought this to my attention so that I can correct your understanding or your mindset. Of course, I didn't say it like that. But the reality is, I'm not angry. You asked me a question and I gave you an answer. And in my past, I would have been like, oh, I should have been softer. I should have been nicer. I should have been more apologetic for the way that this person received or perceived my response. No, I don't have to shrink down because you're not able to accept that I'm a strong woman who has an opinion, who has expertise in a particular area. You asked me a question and I gave you an answer. The point I'm trying to make with that scenario is, in the past, when I cowered down and became apologetic because other people weren't able to receive me, I was functioning much less effectively. It made me question everything I said. It made me rehash every conversation to see if I needed to go apologize to someone for something that I said when I didn't say anything wrong. It made me vulnerable, and not in a good way. It made me begin to question who I was and how I showed up, and if how I showed up was acceptable by others. But others' acceptance is not the determination of my authenticity. My authenticity is determined by me being my true self. I will not compromise. And I'm encouraging you today, don't compromise. Don't become vulnerable and function less effectively for the sake of someone else's opinion of you. Don't shrink back on what it is that you believe in and what you have to offer and what you have to present because someone else might not accept it. One of the biggest things that we talk about in Live Fancy Life, Someone is Waiting for You, is that there are people who respond to the way that you do what you do. What does that mean? There are some people who don't. But the reality is those aren't the people that you were called to influence. Those aren't the people that are in your sphere. And that's okay. You don't need to change yourself to reach everyone, because the reality is you will never reach everyone. You will never please everyone. You will never be everything for everyone. And once you receive that and acknowledge that, you can release that burden off of your shoulders and you can be free to be you without compromise. So I want to remind you once again, to compromise means to accept something slightly different from what you really want, because you're considering the wishes or the ideas or the opinions of others. It means to weaken or harm yourself by accepting standards that are lower than is desirable. And desirable means authentic. It means that you are accepting standards or opinions that are lower or different than the authentic you. And compromising causes you to become vulnerable and function less effectively. We cannot release greatness operating from a place of compromise. We cannot release greatness by operating in a place where we shrink back and we hold back who we are because of someone else's opinion or someone else's perspective. Be you. I dare you. Be you. You know why? because someone is waiting for you. Thank you for joining us for the Fancy Thoughts podcast. I'm Franchesca Hampton, and I look forward to you tuning in again next week. And remember, you are well able, fully capable, and properly equipped to accomplish everything you were created for. So go and make this week a great one.